Namaste, everyone. Today we are going to talk about the upcoming full moon in Jyeshta Nakshatra in sidereal Scorpio, which is going to take place on 10th or 11th of June, depending on your time zone. As you all know, every year we have this one really interesting full moon when both moon and sun are starving. When sun dwells in sidereal Taurus in the sign of the enemy, while the full moon is across the zodiac in its place of debilitation. And that particular full moon, which culminates in sidereal Scorpio, which is the place in which moon representing our mind, our sense of safety, our sense of nourishment, is the most, you could say, malnourished. Naturally, that entire fortnight leading up to this full moon often awakens a lot of emotions in us. Because you see, that full moon, when moon becomes so full, and therefore our minds become so full of our thoughts, so full of emotions, the waters in the oceans are overflowing. Similarly, the emotions inside of us are sometimes overflowing. Not without a reason. It was even scientifically researched that the biggest amount of car accidents is around the full moon time. So when that full moon, which naturally amplifies everything in nature, occurs in its sign of debilitation, one of the first things that we may often experience is that the shadow side of our mind, the negativity of our mind, may sometimes also get amplified. So, of course, from that perspective, full moon in Jyeshta Nakshatra often brings on the surface of our awareness lots of shadow qualities that perhaps we didn't even know they are there. Especially when that full moon occurs in Jyeshta Nakshatra. Such a complex lunar mention, really. Jyeshta is the star ruled by Indra, who is, on one hand, the king of the demigods, and on another hand, his Puranic version is literally the most arrogant, being ever existed. Indra literally in his shadow form represents our own arrogance, our own privileged nature sometimes, our own ego which doesn't give up, which always tries to prove superior. And because of that ends up making many mistakes, ends up doing things that we regret later, ends up saying things that we regret later. So naturally, during that entire bright fortnight, we might like to pay special attention to our words and our actions, but also our thoughts, to see if there is too much pride in them sometimes, or too much of inimical nature, or too much of negative thinking. Jyeshta Nakshatra is also known as the star of perfectionists. And although, of course, people born with prominent placements in this lunar mention can sometimes truly be expert in whatever they are doing. But when we have a situation like this, that moon is about to reach its fullness in Jyeshta Nakshatra, we may also expect that our sensitivity to imperfection may rise. And that also means sensitivity to receiving feedback from others. Sensitivity to also mistakes of others and pointing them out to others. We may be too vigilant. We may be too focused on everything that's wrong. We may be too focused on everything that is potential threat, because ultimately the very Shakti of Jyeshta Nakshatra is Arohana Shakti, power to rise and fight, literally. And especially as this full moon is going to be additionally also aspected by Mars, who in very loose conjunction with Ketu will be already dwelling in the sign of Leo, we may expect that those fight reactions, anger, frustration may arise inside of us. And although there's nothing wrong with healthy anger and healthy aggression, in fact, healthy anger and healthy aggression can sometimes help us to access sometimes really dormant life force inside of us. And yet, at the same time, if this anger or healthy aggression is suppressed or postponed for too long time, or perhaps linked with some of our own traumas and unprocessed emotions, it may end up expressing itself in a way that is toxic, in a way that is not healthy for you or for your environment. And all of those things are the topics we might like to look into during this entire bright fortnight leading us to the full moon in Jyeshta Nakshatra. Really useful questions to ask ourselves during this time is, am I unnecessarily focused on some details, especially imperfect or negative details in my eyes, that perhaps obstruct my view of a bigger picture? Am I seeing the enemy even when there's no enemy? Is my perception of threat accurate, or is it biased by some of my past experiences? Do I see threat even there where there is no threat? Do I suppress sometimes emotions, or do I not know how to express them in a healthy manner? Because guess what? When we suppress emotions, especially during bright fortnights, when moon is growing stronger and stronger and there is just more and more of them piling up every day, ends up eventually in some form of explosion, right? So of course, as every year, whenever full moon occurs in sidereal Scorpio, moon's debilitation place, it's always a very complex time, awakening many emotions, many feelings, many things that we already thought we transcended it, we are above that. Many things that we already thought they did not touch us anymore. We are on one hand inspired to look at our own imperfections, but not to be intimidated by them, but to learn to look past them, to learn to see that they don't define us necessarily or our value, to learn to see that imperfections are just details, and there's more to our being than just those little things. And Jyeshta Nakshatra inspires us always to look at all those things. Because ultimately, Jyeshta is also one of the names of Goddess Kali. Jyeshta is also one of the names of Goddess Niriti, the goddess of chaos, who actually is a form of antithesis of Goddess Lakshmi and inspires us to embrace within ourselves, with love and acceptance, everything that is imperfect, that is shadow, that is dark, without feeling shame, but without being compliant to it either. Because Arohana Shakti of Jyeshta Nakshatra also represents the power to grow, the power to rise, the power to transcend all of that that is imperfect, recognizing that our whole being is something so much greater than that. It's like this little metaphor that my Gurudev often uses. Imperfection is like when you put one black dot on a piece of white paper, and then you ask every person in the room, what do you see in the paper? Everybody will say they see the black dot. But the black dot is so small in comparison to the rest of paper. And that's really the unfortunate reality of our mind and how our brain is designed, that we always will focus on that one thing which is out of order instead of appreciating the greater thing that is perhaps just perfect. So of course, Jyeshta Nakshatra inspires us also to search for the greater perfection. And at the same time to, yes, pursue the path of self-growth and personal growth. That's why every year when there is bright fortnight leading us to full moon in Jyeshta Nakshatra, We are challenged in some ways. We are being shown some of our own, you could say, imperfections, so that we can also grow and not just stay the same all the time. And especially this year is really interesting because that full moon in Jyeshta Nakshatra will be aspected by Mars, as you already know. And at the same time, both Sun and Moon, at the moment of their biggest separation, 180-degree separation, they will be both dwelling in the amsha of Goddess Bhairavi in the D20 chart. And Bhairavi, as one of the 10 Mahavidyas, she actually represents the power of fearlessness inside of us. Bhairavi literally means the one who screams, roars loudly, fiercely, almost fearfully, but at the same time she represents this power to transcend fear, to not allow fear to define us, to not allow fear to create a certain bias to our perception of threat and enmity in the world outside, because that's essentially where it comes from. When we see enemy when there's no enemy, when we see threat when there's no threat, it's always rooted in fear, actually. So naturally, whenever full moon occurs in such an amsha, in the D20 chart of spiritual progress, the amsha of Goddess Bhairavi, we will be inspired throughout whole fortnight to transcend our fears and insecurities as well. Fear of not being perfect enough, fear of not being accepted, fear of being rejected, fear of losing control, fear of how others are going to see me, how others are going to judge me, what will they say? All those topics are very key to Jyeshta Nakshatra in particular. So, of course, during a fortnight like this, we might like to take this opportunity and try to look into some of those things inside of us to see, are those fears also there, or do we have other fears? And usually in a fortnight like this, you don't even need to look for them. They will come and present themselves to you through various external life situations, because that's how the organic intelligence of the universe works. So all it takes from our side is to just consciously observe our minds in time like this, because that's a priceless opportunity to grow, priceless opportunity to really transform some of the negativities inside of us by firstly, of course, allowing ourselves to embrace them, because you can't transform truly anything unless you really accepted it, unless you created enough capacity within your system to hold space for that. And that's often the biggest challenge with Jyeshta Nakshatra, really, because Jyeshta is a very combative nakshatra in nature, and it may awaken some combative feelings inside of us during this fortnight. On a conscious level, maybe you will just register that you're more irritated or frustrated or oversensitive than usual. But in practice, it's just this combative energy of Jyeshta Nakshatra that kind of rises during a fortnight like this. But the thing is that we can't combat the mind with the same combative attitude that created the problem in the first place. The only way to transform it always is through curiosity, actually. See, the opposite of combative attitude, the opposite of judgments, negative thinking, the opposite of stress, the opposite even of self-criticism, the opposite even of trauma. There's only one opposite of all of those, and that's curiosity. Because when you are curious about something, you can't be judgmental about it at the same time, can you? When you're curious about something, biologically, it's not impossible for you to be stressed to the same degree about this thing anymore. So it's also a beautiful time to practice this intentional curiosity so that we may discharge some of that stress that perhaps will come up during that fortnight. And through that, we may learn to grow new capacity, new space within us to actually not be affected to the same degree by those things anymore. So I wish you a very fruitful and a beautiful full moon in Jyeshta Nakshatra. I'm sure that it will bring so many important life lessons to the life of each one of us. The only thing it takes from us is to stay curious and be willing to learn. Namaste.